Hello and welcome back to part 3 of this piano tutorial in Rive. It's been a long time since the last video, but the good news is that I've learned a lot about Rive. I'm going to finally revisit this project and fix it to where I think it's a much more streamlined process. Like for instance, we're going to use some nested inputs. So let's just get started. We're going to jump right in. I turned on the color on these hitboxes, by the way, just so I can see where they're at. And the first thing I want to try to do is create a single nested artboard that contains all 4 of these variations of the keys. So how do we do that? We're going to make this one called white key. And then what I want to do is I want to grab all 4 variations of this hitbox, and we'll copy those and paste them into this white key. So we'll call this the left hitbox. We'll call this one the right hitbox. And then this one is the center hitbox. We'll call this one the full hitbox. And now what we should be able to do in theory is place all of these into a single group and then convert that to a solo. Could also just wrap it in a solo. You can do that too by just right-clicking all of those and saying wrap in solo like this. Wrap in solo. But let's call this the key hitbox. What I'm going to do also is I'm going to remove this hover hitbox, which means I'm going to remove these listeners for that hover hitbox. Okay. So we have a white key press, which is with its pointer down, and a white key lift, which is pointer up. And it's only on the full hitbox, which is this one. And I think what we need to do is create that same set of listeners for all 4 of these. So I'm going to delete these. Well, remember how these are set up as well. I'm going to get rid of these state machines. We're just going to clean some stuff up. And now we have just this white key. What we need to do in order to signal to Rive that we have multiple types of keys is we're going to create an input that's a number input. We'll call this the key position. And actually we'll make it camel case. And so the way we're going to do this is we'll set up a layer, and it'll be called key position layer. We'll create 4 timelines here, where each timeline will activate one of the layers of this solo group that we just made for the hitboxes. That'll allow Rive to understand which position each key is in. So let's do that. We'll call this the left. And we'll activate this one, and it shows up as a keyframe in the timeline here, right? Let's make a new one. We'll call this center. Right there. Another timeline for the right. And then one last timeline for the full one, the full variation. And then we'll have to just select this and click the active. So there we go. We've got 4 variations of that hitbox. Okay, now let's make a folder for those. We're going to call this the key positions, and we'll just drag those into that folder. It's always good to keep your animation timeline list organized as you can as you go, just because once you start adding a whole lot of states and layers and stuff, it starts to get a little bit out of control. So, okay, we still have an event that's called key pressed. And that will happen when the user presses down on it. Okay. We don't need this clipping shape. We can just use the clip artboard function here on the top right. And that will always make sure that it never goes past the bounds of this artboard. So thanks to Jeff McAvoy, by the way, for that tip. That was a long time ago now, but it's still a helpful one. And it's good to remember that you can do that with nested artboards. All right, so what we're going to do now is I'm gonna lock this full hitbox so that we can actually start to select these. Okay, we still have the positions for these nested artboards figured out, but they have no artboard connected to them anymore. So up here in the top right, we're just going to replace all of these with white keys. And we will lose all the animations added to this nested artboard. That's correct. All right, so then we're going to call this low C. And I'm just going to go through this, and we'll fast forward so you don't have to watch me do this for every single one. Okay, I've reconnected all of these nested artboards to that single white key artboard that we made. and they are all renamed as well. So we're ready to start messing with this state machine again. So everything should be, from a logic standpoint, everything should be done inside of this nested artboard. Key position, this is something that we want to expose to the parent artboard. And that's because each of these nested artboards are going to have that input assigned to them at the start of the animation. So on entry, every single one of these is going to be given an input of which key position it is. And so now we're going to grab each of these key positions and move them into this layer. And using the any state rather than entry, move those out of the way, we will create conditions for each of these. So these are just the transitions again, right? So just as a refresher, these, from the any state, you're telling Rive that it's possible that any one of these could happen at any point. All right, so let's call the left one the 0. So for this left one, this transition has a condition that says if the key position, which is this input here, is equal to 0, it will have this hitbox. And then we'll do the same for the other 3. We'll just call this one 1, 2, and 3. If key position is 1, do that one. If it's 2, and then the full one will be the 3. All right? So real quick, let's test that out. We're going to turn off the black keys real quick. Just going to turn those to invisible so we can see what the hitboxes are doing. So we're going to create a timeline where we set the inputs as whatever we want them to be. So because the inputs are exposed to the parent on this parent artboard level, we will need to add a keyframe for each of these that sets the input that we want. So let's call this key positions. And that's the name of this timeline. And then we'll grab the low C. We'll add key position is 0. For D, the key position is 1. And I'm going to do the same for the rest of these. So if it's a full key, we'll make it 3. If it's a right key, we'll make it 2. Okay, and then the left key is 0. I need these black keys back so I can actually see which one. Okay, G will be a middle. A is another middle. B is a 2. And then the high C is the only one that we have that's a 3. So now we can turn off those black keys, and then when we test out this piano state machine, it did not work. They are all set to 0 because our state machine is not playing this key positions that we just created. Let's add a layer for key positions. And I'm going to put this at the far left because I want this to happen before anything else. It needs to know which position each key is in before anything else happens. So let's set this to entry, and now let's press play on our cat piano. There we go. So we've solved now the issue of having multiple nested artboards. There's no reason to do that. You can use a single nested artboard with an input that changes at the parent level. All right, let's keep going. The next thing we're going to do is create those press states. And we're going to make sure that when we are pressed down and we want to slide up and down, that it stays pressed on all of these. That's going to be what we do next. Somehow we had it set up before where when we drag, it stays pressed because we have 2 different hitboxes. One where on hovering, the hover hitbox is set to 100% 100% scale, so it's there. And on not hovering, the hover hitbox is set to 0%. So you would either enter or exit that hover hitbox, and when it's entered, it would set it to pressed, and if it's exited, it sets it to not pressed. So it's a separate hitbox that's just for the hover function. So as I've been editing this video, I'm realizing that the concepts behind what we're actually doing is a little bit complicated. So I'd like to walk through at a more basic, high level, what it is that we're actually doing here and why we're doing it. And I'll just explain it in listeners. At its core, we need to make 3 hitboxes. And what that means is we're really making 3 listeners. The first listener we need is obviously something needs to tell Rive that we've pressed the key. So that's why we have this first set of hitboxes, the key press hitboxes. So if we make sure that we're on this white key 2 and I press the state machine, it can tell when we've pressed the key. It fires an event that says key pressed, and that's how we're getting our sound effects back through Rive. That's the simplest one that we need to know. And so now if we go to this test example state machine, you can see that if we try to press these, yes, they are being pressed, but then when we move off of it, it's not continuing to press even though we're holding the mouse button down. So that brings us to our second listener, which is the hovering listener. So we're going to put a whole new set of hitboxes here on these keys. So we've covered the pressing hitboxes, but we need a hovering hitbox as well. Similarly to how we made these key press hitboxes that are shaped like the actual key, we need to do the same with this new set of hitboxes. And I have these colored red so that you can really see what's going on, but we'll just stick to the one for now, this full hitbox. The behavior that we want when we hover over the keys on this key hover hitbox is that we actually want it to press down when we hover over it. And so we're going to set up listeners for this hitbox so that when pointer enters, we actually change the input from pressed to true. And then when pointer exits, we're going to set pressed to false. So real quick, I just changed the names of these from whatever it was to full hover enter and full hover exit. And I made sure that when we enter this full hover hitbox, it's going to set this Boolean pressed to true. And then when we exit, it's going to set pressed to false. And so let's just see what that actually looks like when we scroll over this. I'm not clicking or anything. I'm just moving my mouse over it. So that's listener number 2. So now we have a press listener and we have a hover listener, and the hovering works now, except now you're probably thinking, well, you don't want that hovering on all the time. You want to have a way to sort of turn that hovering hitbox on only when you are dragging and clicking. And so that's what brings us to this third listener. And so at the parent level, so not inside of the key, but at this parent artboard level, we're going to create a third hitbox that covers the whole keyboard. And this is going to set hovering to true. With me so far? What is this listener going to actually do? Well, because we have the ability to change inputs in nested artboards from the parent level, we can actually set this hitbox to set all of these hovering Booleans to true. And in doing that, what we can do is we can have 2 different timelines for these hitboxes to appear and disappear. So how do we make something appear and disappear in Rive? Well, we can scale it from 0 to 100%. So if it's at 0%, you can't see those hitboxes. But if it's at 100%, you can see the hitboxes. Does that make sense? So let me show you what I mean. Inside of this white key, we have a not hovering and a hovering timeline. In the not hovering timeline, these key hovers that we set up, which are the hitboxes for us to hover across, these are at 0% scale. And that's it. It's a single keyframe that's at 0%. And now it's not visible. But if we go to hovering, key hovers is set to 100% scale, which means it's visible. So no matter what key it is, if it's left, right, middle, it will always be this parent one that's going from 0% to 100%. So that's what the state machine is doing. We have these 2 timelines, not hovering, where the scale is set to 0% on those hover hitboxes, and hovering, where it's set to 100%. So when this Boolean is set to false, it will go to not hovering. And if this Boolean is set to true, it'll go to hovering. And so thankfully, inside of Rive, we can use this parent level to create a listener on a hitbox that covers the whole keyboard. So I will set this hitbox to be probably about this big, so it's a little bit forgiving. This is kind of what we're going to do in the main artboard too. But again, this is just to illustrate for you the 3 listeners that we need in order for this to work. So this Now this hitbox on pointer down is going to set hovering to true on all of those keys. I'm going to call that listener drag on. I'm going to duplicate it, call this drag off, and we're going to set all of these to false and make sure this is set to pointer up. I'm also going to change this so that it says pointer exit, and that's also going to set hovering to false. I'm going to turn this down so that we can't see it anymore, but that's still going to stay there. This will still be active at 0%. It's not active if you turn it completely off like this. So if you actually set the visibility off, these hitboxes won't work anymore. But if it's on, but at 0% opacity, it still works. I'm going to turn these key hovers to 0% as well so that we can't actually see them. So now, if we give it a try, we can press, but then we can also press and drag because there's another hitbox here that's setting these to hover underneath the surface. Okay, so I hope that helped. I know it's a really kind of a convoluted and complicated process, but hopefully this was a helpful kind of aside. So back to the real tutorial. So we're going to set up another set of keyframes under these key positions so that on the key hovers, it's only going to be that hitbox and we're not going to go past it. So for the full, we're going to make sure it's this full hitbox is active. On right, it's the right hitbox. Center is center and left is left. Okay. On not hovering, this should be 0%. On hovering, this should be 100%. And this is what's going to set whether those are pressable or not. The hovers will be controlled at the parent level with this larger hitbox, and the presses will be controlled at this level. If you have a parent hitbox that will control the hover state, that means that when it's hovering, which only happens if you click down, it'll set it so that those hover hitboxes are visible so that you can drag across it. It's pressing or not pressed, and one that's letting you know whether it's on it or not. So center hover is set press to true. The hovers will set the pressed state to true or false. We're going to duplicate this and we're going to do hover exit. And it's for the exit to be false. And then the last but not least, the right one. We'll organize this a little bit. We're going to double check that this sets those. So clicking down sets hovering to true on those keys. Up sets it to false and leaving sets it to false. So now we should be able to try it. Let's see what happens. Okay. It works. All right, so that theory worked. We needed to make sure that we had two separate hitboxes that were keyable with inputs. One for the hovers and one for the presses. The hovers are controlled by the parent and the presses are controlled by the nested artboard. Okay, so I think now we can finally turn these keys to white so that we don't see this red hitboxes. We can also turn this hitbox to be not visible. And we'll test that out again. I don't think we have any overlapping hitboxes anymore. So now when I press this black one, it's not, and then I drag over here, it's not activating these hitboxes, which is nice, but it's not including it when we drag across. And so we need to do that. Let's make sure that that one is also pressing these down. So what do we have going on here? We have a not hovering and hovering. The hover hitbox is set to 100 and okay. So I think that's just something we have to do here. On the click down, we're not setting hovering to true on the black keys. So let's just do that here. The black keys are the G sharp, D sharp, F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. So let's start at the bottom with G sharp, setting that to true. D sharp, F sharp, A sharp, and then C sharp. Okay, so now we have hovering set to true. And then we have to do the same for the up and for the leave. except we're going to set these to false. So I'll just fast forward through this part. All right, we're almost there. We almost have this all set up. We have a single nested artboard now that's controlling all of these keys. And now all we have to do is set up those sounds to play when those keys are pressed. So let's do that. So I thought we were going to do this at the layer level, but we're not going to. We're going to do it at the listener level. So every single one of these key pressed events, which happens here, right? So anytime it's pressed, this key pressed event happens. We need to set up a listener for each one of the nested versions of that. So let's do it. So we got the B key has key pressed reporting B. The low C has the C key pressed for D. And we're just going to go through each one of these, make sure that the key pressed events have at least the reporting of that key happening. So we're going to do that for every single key. So now it should work. Very nice. So we did some cleanup, right? We set this up so that it's only got, it only has a single nested artboard across all of these, which is great. And now we can slide our finger across and it works. But now how do we set it up so that like we want to have a different keyboard sound for any of these keys? Like if I wanted these to have a meow sound effect, how would I do that when it's on this version of the keyboard? Or if we wanted to add another button, how would we make that happen? So the way that I have this set up is we have a keyboard type. We're going to make a number input called keyboard type. And this needs to be accessible to the parent artboard. So we're going to expose that to the parent artboard. If it's the keyboard type 0, we're going to have it be the white keys. We need to figure out when key pressed gets reported. Right here, when basically right after when pressed is true, key pressed gets reported at the start. However, we need to make it so that it's we have two different versions. We have one that's key pressed for the cat keyboard and one that's key pressed for the regular keyboard. So let's make another event and we'll call this cat key press. We have two conditions on this, not just the is pressed true. We need to also make sure that the keyboard type is 0. Now let's grab one more transition. You can have multiple variations of this transition. This second transition will be, the condition is the same. Is key pressed true? Yes. Now if keyboard type is 1, we're going to report the event cat key press. So now we need to go back to our cat piano, and on all of these keys, we need to make a duplicate. We're going to do it like this. We'll just right click all of these, duplicate them. And now we'll just grab all these 2s, going to move them into another folder. We'll call this the cat. Alt key, all these keys are called 2 now, but I want to call them something else. So I'm just going to rename all of these and so I found all of these meow sound effects. We have A sharp, B, C, C high, C sharp, all the way through. And basically they're all the same meow. They're this small meow that I found. And that's fine and it'll work. But it would be kind of nice to have varying sounds for the cat. So it's not always the same meow, but sometimes it varies, right? It could give it a little bit of flavor as it's singing through a song or something. So in order to do that, I would need to have some level of state machine control rather than just firing them with the events. That's something that I think would be fun to figure out, but I'm not going to do it in this tutorial. I think it's maybe a little bit too complicated to figure it out in this particular video. I think we're just going to stick with making sure that the meow sounds play when it's the cat. So let's do that. So for the cat B key, this needs to say cat key pressed, and then we're going to do meow small b. And we're going to do the same thing for all of these. It gets a little bit cumbersome because you're going through a huge list, right, of all these sounds, but we got to make sure when it's cat key press This is the low C key. Meow small is C. On the D press, meow small D. And I'm just going to keep going through this whole thing. I realized we didn't have the events set up yet for the cat on the black keys. So we're going to add that here. We need to make sure our input is here, which is keyboard type. And then on key press, instead of having this event firing at the timeline level, we're going to have this event fire in the state machine, key pressed. So if black key pressed is true and keyboard type is 0, go to black key pressed. And then if black key pressed is true and keyboard type is 1, we're going to do cat key press at start. All right, so now we can add that to these sharps. Sometimes you get this feeling when you're working in Rive and you start setting up complex state machines like this, and as you're doing it, you're like, God, I hope this works. And then you get this surprising, this fun little surprise when you press the state machine play button and it all works. It's such a nice surprise if it works, right? And it doesn't always, and you have to go back and figure it out. But it's a fun challenge. But this is where I'm at right now. I'm going through all of these cat keyboard presses and trying to make sure that all of them are reporting the correct sound. And I'm praying that it works when I press the button. So hold on. All right, here we go. Fingers crossed. All right, so far so good. Now let's hit that key button. So did we not set up the input for the cat keyboard to change? With the button press is cat. This needs to set the keyboard type. So we have the cat and piano triggers, but this needs to set the keyboard type as well. So let's do this. Piano to cat, keyboard shape. I think we're just going to do it here. Let's just add a keyframe to each of these. We're going to add a keyframe. Keyboard type. If it's cat to piano, it's changing it back to piano. And this is where it needs to, probably right here, it needs to fire keyboard type of 0. We'll do the same thing for all the rest of these. And this is in the parent artboard. So if you're confused about where we are just changing, we're adding a keyboard type keyframe. I suppose if we wanted to, we could add one more layer to the state machine. That's the keyboard type layer, like right in here somewhere. We could add a keyboard type layer that has two different animation timelines. One that has the keyboard type of 0, and one, it's just a single keyframe timeline that switches when cat or piano is triggered. But I'm just going to do it right here in this cat to piano. So it changes it here. And we'll do that with the black keys as well. We need to make sure that that's exposed. It doesn't look like it is. So it's exposed now, so we should be able to see those. Let's go to the black keys. Keyboard type is 0. So I don't love that I have to keep clicking this state machine slider button here to bring up that keyboard type keyframe, but Rive is coming out with updates all the time. So let's, I'm just going to cut them some slack. So now we're at keyboard type 0. And I think I want to set these keyframes. I'm going to copy these keyframes to this keyboard shape as well. Okay, so from piano to cat, right here, we're going to add keyframes right here that say the keyboard type needs to be 1. I could, in theory, copy and paste the keyframes from one timeline to another and then just change it in the timeline, but twirling it down versus just grabbing it over here, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Sort of just a preference thing. I do wish this was a little bit easier to change these on the fly, but I think we have it all hooked up now. What I did was I added keyframes for each of these keys to let it know which keyboard type it is. So that's working fine, which it was before. But now if we switch to cat, it works. Amazing. Oh my gosh. So I noticed something weird, which is that when we press down in the Rive app, it doesn't play the sound until I lift the key back up, which is weird because inside of this nested artboard here, we've set this up so this event happens at the start. So right before it even like gets to this, it should be playing the key pressed sound. You can see that here, but it's not playing at the start. Yeah, it does it the first time. Then after that, it waits until I lift the keyboard key back up. It's like not working until I bring the key back up. If I open the share link though, it does work on the downs. Not sure why. I'm not sure why that's happening, but it might be something that is a bug. There's just one more thing to cover, and it's that transformation from the keyboard to the cat. You can see, I mean, it's a pretty simple button setup, right? We've got this keyboard button with the top, the keys, right? And then there's a little side, which is how we can make it look like it's a button. And then we have this cat, which is set up in this very same way. And it's just simple listeners to set up the cat button up and the cat button down. We fire inputs to change what kind of keyboard it is. And then we have these keyboard button presses, which, you know, look like this. And the unpress looks like that. The press for the cat looks like this. So we have these set up on their own layers. And then I just made some simple transformations inside of, you know, a timeline. So on keyboard press, we just have it switching. It's a color shift and the actual keyboard itself, right? We just have a color transition, and these ears flop out, and there's a kind of a squash and stretch. Nice and snappy, right? And then we do the same thing from cat to keyboard, but in the opposite direction. We also have a kind of a default state, which is the keyboard shape. So it's a kind of a simple setup, but I understand that if people haven't done this kind of thing before, then it's like, oh, you know, maybe you just might need somebody to sort of walk you through it. But the way I have that set up here in the state machine is we start on entry with the keyboard shape as a piano. And then when the cat keyboard input is pressed, which is just a trigger, it transitions from keyboard to cat, from piano to cat. We have another transition to the cat to piano if the piano trigger is fired. So it's probably a better way to set this up, but this is for the keyboard shape, and then these are for just the button presses. So each of these buttons has their own layer, and then there's the keyboard shape layer. So that's how we set that part up. All right, so thanks for bearing with me through all that time. I know there was a long time between tutorials, but I think this is a much cleaner project now, and I think it's working a lot better. So I would encourage you at this point to be creative and find a way to make this keyboard somehow your own. Come up with a button of your own that changes the look of the keyboard. Maybe it creates some sort of rainbow effect across, or maybe there's like a frog sound effect. I don't want to give you too many ideas because I want this to be your creative output. Anyway, thanks for bearing with me through all of that. I think it was this is a pretty complicated project with lots and lots of state machine stuff going on and events. But I'm glad we revisited. I'm glad we cleaned this up and we made this really, really work nicely, I think. All right. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Hopefully sooner than later.